Back in the days, we had money in the animation, but now we don't. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yes, we don't. Jimmy Neutron was one of the early ones. Used 3D Studio for DOS. But Jimmy Neutron was one of that before Maya became. By the time that they were, I think, on the full series, and they were switching to completely to Maya. We did a movie, the G.I. Joe movie that we did a long time ago. Right now, you can grab Unreal and do that almost hand in 3 months, 2 months. Big companies, they are not going to want to spend $100 million on an animated movie. Companies now are trying to lower the budget so they can do more. But Book of Life was then included. So the render of Book of Life is Mantra.
Hello and welcome to Prolific Perspectives. This is Kamal Hassan, your host and founder of Prolific Animation Studio. We are all about exploring innovation, entrepreneurship, and how to be successful. Today we have an amazing guest with us, worked with many notable projects, have an experience over 30 years into the animation industry, worked as a director, VFX supervisor, and many things. So welcome, Augusto Schillaci. Hey Augusto, how are you?
How you doing, Kamal? Good, man. Nice to meet you and happy to be here.
Nice to meet you too. Pleasure to have you with us. So Augusto, please give your brief introduction to our audience to know more about you.
Yeah, so I've been working on the animation field for almost 35 years. So it's been a long journey. I started in Argentina, where I come from. I did around 7 years there, and then I moved to Canada for a year and a half. Working on a TV series, the first TV series done in Maya, with a co-production with France and some motion capture. This was in 2000. I started in 1993. From that, I always wanted to work on the United States. Like that's where animation was, and I wanted to go there. So I got a job working at the feature film for Jimmy Neutron. So I moved to Dallas, Texas. And that's kind of how I got. I was hired by Paramount Pictures at that point. I worked on the film Jimmy Neutron and in Texas. And then my idea was going to go to LA, but eventually, after I finished Jimmy Neutron, I did I think it was like 4 or 5 episodes of the TV series of Jimmy Neutron. But at that point, I met these people at Real Effects, and that they were based in Dallas, and they were just a commercial company. And at that point there was only, I think, 10 people, maybe no more than that. And I like the idea of starting, grow a company from the inside and be one of the early ones. I've been with Real Effects since then, so it's been around 24, 25 years that I've been with Real Effects. My background always started as a lighter. That's how I started. Then from that I moved as a visual effects supervisor. And then from a visual effects supervisor, I moved as a director writer. And also I have a secondary job at Real Effects as an executive creative director from being at the company for so long. So I oversee all the projects coming in. But it's been a journey.
If I ask you that, you just mentioned that you work in a commercial agency or a company versus an animation studio. So how was your experience with a commercial agency? Back in the 90s.
Yeah, it's different. When I started it, and a lot of people who start, outside of the United States, you start as a generalist. So you know a little bit of everything because, you have to, do a little bit of everything, is small teams. So, and that's how I started it in Argentina. I knew a lot of it. Always my inclination was about, I always like more about the lighting, the rendering, the final look of the stuff. So when I got the chance to go to Montreal, that is in Canada, when I worked for this thing, they were more structured, like kind of like what we have now on these bigger projects. So they only needed a lighter, and I was just like, yeah, I can be a lighter. So I just kind of like went, but before that, it was mainly generalist. And when you work on small projects, even my own projects, you are doing a little bit of everything. I never focused on animation, like keyframe animation. Always it's been the other stuff. Always keyframe animation has been my weak stuff as a journalist. But as a journalist, you do a little bit of everything, you get together. But then I just focus on that. But that's a big difference. The bigger productions that have that much, they require like only modeling, only rigging, only because it's kind of like the nature of the beast. But working on either commercials or small projects or short or this, it allows you to do a little bit of the generalist. Now, and we can talk about it a little bit later, but generalists are coming back. Like companies now, even companies like Real Effects or Sony, they're looking for journalists too, because it's also a cost. If you don't have lighting to do on a project, you can be doing modeling. If you don't have modeling, so
Absolutely.
you use the people. So now generally has been becoming more in request, as before that was more specific people, if it makes sense.
So I'll start with the question that if you have had an incredible career spanning over 30 years, what was your entry point into the animation and VFX?
Well, in Argentina, we were like, I was kind of old, but I started very young. I'm not that old, but I started it with software, that was very complicated to use. The software I started it was called Wavefront. Before even Maya existed. From that, I moved to a software called Alias Power Animator. So these were all running very, very expensive machines, silicon graphic machines. And if you didn't know anybody that could get you in that, it was very difficult. I got the lucky, I was working in a TV station that they have those machines. So I learned it through that TV station. So I kind of like self-learn. It's been self-learn from me all the time. But that's kind of what's my entry. Now it's different. You have schools, and we go and recruit to schools. Or the whole thing is in a better established thing. When I started it, it was like there were no schools, there were no books, very little books, especially not in Argentina. So it was like I got the lucky to be on the right place, to get into it. And then from that, knowing people, and they, working for free here, let me do this, I can try, just because the passion of learning, and then eventually moving into the bigger companies as a VFX and changing all the stuff. But it was being at the right time, early on. Now it's a different story of how that works.
So coming from Argentina, in over 30 years, you have worked with many big names: Warner Bros., Sony, DreamWorks, and other big names out there in the animation industry. So making your mark globally, what challenges did you face breaking into the industry?
Part of my history, especially here in the US, it is very related to real effects, because I kind of grow up with real effects to that. So my challenges were the challenges that we had at real effects on the stuff. When we started at real effects, we were very small company. We were doing I did some VFX for Spy Kids 2 with Robert Rodriguez. That's how we broke into it. We did it was a machine on a park ride called the Juggler, and he was throwing stuff. So Robert Rodriguez was doing a Spy Kids, I think it was a Spy Kids 2 or Spy Kids, I don't remember. And they needed some effects, and because he's in Austin and we were here in Texas, so we did some of that. It was great. That gave us a couple of commercials in 3D. We did some commercials for G.I. Joe, and for the G.I. Joe toys, and that kind of got us to do 2 direct-to-DVDs for Hasbro for G.I. Joe. And that was kind of really our entry to get into a movie. We did these direct-to-DVDs movies. If you look at it right now, they don't look really good. You could do that at your home. But at that point, it was pretty big. But so we got slowly by slowly. One of the biggest things that got me, and, we got to do some of what is called the PSA, like the commercials for the movies, So they hired us to do. This was one of the biggest breaking points at Real Effects. No, they hired us to do. The movie Robots from William Joyce. They needed to do some popcorn. Don't use the cell phone on the theaters, things like that. But the problem is they didn't have their. They have their own proprietary. Blue Sky had their own proprietary software, their own proprietary render at that point. And they say, we need you to do these commercials, but you cannot have technology. So I come up
Yeah.
with this idea of asking to render the characters that they have, all these robots, front, side, left, with an ambient lighting. So we kind of project it. So you kind of figure it out how to get. And slowly, companies started to hire us, DreamWorks hires to do commercials for Shrek and Kung Fu Panda. And so we become kind of like the company who can match the look of the other company and do the comments, do the projects, the commercials. And eventually, we got our own movies with open season for Sony, and we did open season 2, open season 3, and then the whole thing off. I hope that answered your question, but it's kind of like it's
Yeah, yes, you
gradually
did.
going
You did.
into.
You did. Absolutely. So if I'll talk about your project that has that has been a huge success with multiple awards like Calesita, what inspired you to create this story?
I wanted it. Part of me, like being VFX supervisor, my last project as a VFX supervisor was the Book of Life. We can talk about that later too, but that was like, I grew up as a lighter into a VFX supervisor. A VFX supervisor, a bunch of projects. My culmination as a VFX supervisor was the Book of Life, and I always love it telling the stories. I always love it directing. Early on,
Okay.
now it's different, but early on, you to become a director in animation, you needed to come from a story. Companies
Absolutely.
would never
100%.
hire you to be, and it still applies, but before it was like you will not be able to direct an animated movie if you didn't come from stories, from storyboarding,
Absolutely.
and then head of story, and then you could be, now when Netflix got
And
involved.
I think it was a right approach. If you are a good storyteller, if you can, turn that, story into a storyboard, then you can actually become a
Yeah,
good
and it
director.
makes
So
total
that was a
sense.
good practice.
But they were
Yeah.
very like only this. Eventually, when more movies needed to be done, an animation director or animation supervisor could become a director. So I was always very interested in directing, but at that point it was very difficult because I didn't come from a storyboarding. I was coming from VFX soup. A VFX soup that becomes a director was that point was very hard. Now we got 3 directors, 2 directors per movie, VFX soup, writers, animation directors. So you get it. Now is that I'm glad to. It has become more open for a lot of more people, thankfully, because I think a lot of more people can tell stories. But continue to what you were asking. Even during my time with Book of Life, I always was being interested in directing and telling stories. And I got this story of mine, you know, and I was sucking from every director I work. I was asking questions: How you do this? Why you're doing this? Or if I met the writer, how you do this? So I was learning on the background, because I always wanted it to, for me, VFX supervisor was great because you kind of oversee the whole movie, but I wanted to now have control of my creation of the story. That. So my next step is either I stay as a VFX supervisor for the whole rest of my life, or I try to move into the next thing that was a passion for me and was creating stories. So being a director and write was my next thing that I wanted. So I was kind of like learning from the other directors, and I always wanted to do this short of La Calesita, that means merry-go-round in Spanish. Through my wife, I met this merry-go-round operator who was kind of like the heart of the town in Argentina, and everybody loved it. And I always thought that this was a great story because it talks about the generations that goes through a neighborhood and how maybe these little things like a merry-go-round could be so important for all the kids that then become adults. So
So
I
so so
wanted to
so
tell
so
this
do you
story
do
about
so
that.
so do you prefer working on original stories like a Calacita, or bringing someone else's vision to life as you did in the Book of Life?
I do both. I enjoy both, to be honest. I always, always a creator, a storyteller will tell you you want to do your own stories. If I prefer, I would love to do my own stories, but I enjoy working on somebody else's stories too. Because animation is a passion for me. And yes, you work for somebody else's story, but you always get to bring part of you into that story.
Yeah,
And working with the right
absolutely.
director, the right writer, the right, you know, client, it allows you
Uh-huh.
that. So you don't feel like you're just punching numbers, you feel like you're part of, especially at the level that I am, But of course, I always will prefer to work on my stories because that's, a storyteller will always tell you that. Um, but that's how I did. So now, one of the great things that I believe that now makes me a different director is that I've been working on the trenches of the movies for so long that I know all the ins and outs. And one of the great things, for example, that we did in Book of Life was a movie that I don't remember how much it cost, but I'm going to put a price. Let's say a movie that cost $40 million or $50 million, we
Yeah.
make it look like $80 million. And that was because of
Absolutely.
all the tricks that we did. It's a movie that didn't cost or 90 or $100 million. So when I had to do Calesita, I had all
Uh-huh.
that knowledge with me.
Okay.
You know, and that was
Okay.
one of the things that, if you see Calesita has like 52 characters,
Yeah.
different seasons of weather, different, you know, it looked like a mini movie, but that was, to do that is very complicated. If you see a short, so it's two characters, one
Yeah.
environment. Mine was like a mini movie, and that was thankfully because I knew so much of how to, optimize all that it helped me creating the stuff. Aside from creating a story, but it's a story that I was working for like, I think I was working like 6 years on that story. At Real Effects,
Oh.
the thing is like, Real Effects is always busy. So Real Effects told me, yeah, you can do it with us. We give you the people only
Uh-huh.
when they're not being
Uh-huh.
used,
Uh-huh.
but they're always being used. So one funny story for me is like the stuff that, it's a sad but happy story at the same time. It's like a bittersweet, because I got to do the short thanks to the pandemic. You know, the pandemic was a crazy thing, but during the pandemic,
Yeah, it was.
the studio went to a pause. So I got all the people at my disposal for that time. So I took that advantage of the pandemic and we tested remote working. We tested all with my short. So
Okay.
I really think that maybe it would have cost me another 3, 4 years to make the short if it wasn't because
Oh.
the pandemic.
So
Because
how did it turn out? How did it turn out for you to work remotely with people?
at that point, you didn't have another choice, but we developed some tools, how we review. So we use that now we use every day because we still have people working remotely and all that stuff. I'm old school. Like I started
Okay.
very early. I like to go to the machine, sit with the person, talk. I
Uh-huh.
like to go
Mm-hmm.
have
Mm-hmm.
lunch with the team, have dinner with the
Uh-huh.
team, stay a little bit late and, have drinks and have fun. So I enjoy that. But
Okay.
at the same time, you got used to work with remotely. It's different because you have to be much more organized because let's say you got an hour with the team to talk about something, to talk about an environment. You have to be sure that you know what you're going to tell them, what you're going to, because then they have to go work. So if you don't give them the right information, if you don't give them the right notes, you may lose them for another 3 hours because they are not clear. Now, when they were at the
Uh-huh.
same place, you could walk or they can come talk to you in 2 seconds. So you as a director needs to be much more prepared. In my
Absolutely.
opinion, when you work remotely, because you have to optimize the time that people has to do these things. Uh,
Absolutely.
I leave it with no questions. But that's how,
Uh-huh.
that's how kind of
Uh-huh.
like the Calesita became to be. And, again, it's a very complex short, but thankfully I managed to do it through.
So you have mastered both technical and creative storytelling. When directing, do you find yourself learning more towards the artistic or technical side?
I never was super technical. I'm not a programmer or I'm not like that, but I know all the ins and outs of what a movie, and the tricks. I always say having experience means that you messed it up so many times that you know what not to do.
Uh-huh.
That's what experience is about. I've been doing it
Yeah,
for too long.
absolutely.
I really messed it up many times, so now I know I don't to do. At the end of the day, that's
Uh-huh.
in my opinion what experience is about.
Uh-huh.
But it creates a different type of director, in my opinion, because, for example, let's say I'm a creative. I'm working on this environment on La Calesita, and it's gonna have. So when I'm writing this, when I'm doing the story, I already know that this is
Mm-hmm.
going to be too expensive or too complicated.
Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
I prepare myself in a way that to do it knowing that it's not going to be crazy or impossible to make. We work sometimes with the
Mm-hmm.
writers or writers from
Uh-huh.
other places where they don't worry about that stuff. And used to be a time when animation had a lot
Mm-hmm.
of money that didn't matter. You know what I'm saying? People could write.
So you mean you that back in the days we had money in the animation, but now we don't?
I
Is that
mean,
you're
the
trying to say?
budgets, the budgets are yes, we don't. I mean, in a way, the budgets are much lower. People before a normal movie
Uh-huh.
used to be $70 million for a big company.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now it's 40 or 45.
Yeah, absolutely.
You
Half of the
have,
budget. Yeah.
but we want the same quality for that amount of money.
Absolutely. And what do you think? What are the reasons behind it? Getting low budgets from the big names or animation companies out there. Why they have reduced down the budgets?
I think the business model has changed. Before
It has.
you used to have two movies. Before you used to have one movie a year as an animation that was released. Then maybe you got two or three movies a year. With the streamers coming in, you have so much to do. So animation kind of like changed on how it was. Before it was like, oh, is that big? You're gonna go watch Toy Story, and it's gonna be this movie.
Yeah.
Then you had to wait another
Mm-hmm.
2 years to watch or 3 years to watch another. Now,
Absolutely.
so with the quantity of movies, the whole budget has been changing because you cannot do 5 movies a year,
Mm-hmm.
or
Mm-hmm.
somebody cannot at an $80 million budget. It's
Yeah.
impossible. It's just not sustainable. So companies now are trying to lower their budgets so they can do more. Because
Mm-hmm.
the streamers and how we now consume movies is that we want to see more, and we want to see TV series.
Absolutely. So,
People,
where do you see the animation industry in the next 5, 10 years? Do you think it's gonna evolve more? Do you think the budgets will be much lower than we have right now? So, what's your take on
I
that?
think it's a lot of aspects. I don't think it's a simple answer on that, but I also have to say that yes, the budgets are lower, but also technology has helped to maintain the quality. Technology has got better. The technology that we used to have 20 or 15 years ago to make animated movies is not the same technology as today. The renders are 10 times faster, the stuff. Now, of course, people want more quality as it goes. I think that has helped,
Mm-hmm.
I think in the next, are different factors, but in the next 5, 10 years, I think they're going to go lower, but I think they're going to be different.
And also the things will be much easier in the 5, 10 years. The
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
the technical aspect, it's gonna evolve more. The AI will be helpful for it is helpful right now, and it will be more mature in the next few years, and that's gonna help us optimize our
Yeah.
pipelines. And if we will be able to optimize the pipelines and timelines, then definitely no one would mind working with low budgets. So as you just said previously, it took it normally takes around 3 to 4 years to get the animation movie done. Now people want the movie done in 1 year, and people are looking for another movie to be done or release in the next 1 or year or two. So I think AI will be impacting it, and AI will be helpful for us to make a fast production with low budgets.
Yeah,
What do
it's,
you
it's,
say?
it's everything. Is AI, is the technology. And right now, we are receiving budgets. There are different tiers. I think they're always going to be the 50, $80 million movies. But they're going to be
Absolutely.
very few, like
Very few.
Pixar, Disney, Sony. They may be able to
Yeah.
do what, and with a big name director, they're very few. Then you
Yeah.
have the $30 million budget movies. That's kind of becoming the new.
Yeah.
But now we've been
Absolutely.
seeing $10 to $15 million budget movies. So I think there's going to be
Yeah.
different tiers with different
Yeah.
qualities and expectations. I
Absolutely.
think we're going to see in the next 5, 10 years, we're going to see a lot more of the $10 million movies. We're going to see
Yeah.
also a lot of the $30 million movies or $20 million movies. And
Hmm.
again, very few of before it used to be only one budget, one type of movie.
But I have a different take on that. Big names like Pixar, Disney, DreamWorks, Warner Bros, and many other big names out there. they would want to, optimize the budgets as well, because they are,
100%. Yeah, and they're already doing
yeah,
it. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, they're
absolutely,
already
because
doing
they want
100%.
to. They are following their own pipelines. They have their own engines. They have their own softwares to produce things. So they might be, lowering down their budgets, because you must have read, articles of, of the LA animation industry. People are, worried about, of the future of the animation industry. It's because of the big names. They want to work with the low budgets. They want to hire, cheap talent, and at the same time they will be improving their pipelines, their
Yeah, and they
engines,
are
and their
100%.
softwares too. Yeah.
100%. A movie that is already happening. A movie that now they're making for $80 million or $70 million is to be $120
Yeah,
million, $150 million.
absolutely,
I
absolutely.
was on that times of the 140, $50 million movies. So it's happening
Yeah,
already. It's
it
now
is.
what is happening too, and that's why big companies or the big studios, they are not gonna want to spend $100 million on an animated movie when the audience that consumes movies, they see so much animation that they don't they will, for them, seeing a $40 million movie and an $80 million movie, it may not be a difference.
Absolutely.
For the audience that consumes the movies,
Yeah.
they care about a good story. They care about a great, I mean, this example of the Oscar winner is a perfect example of this industry changing. Flow was done with
Yeah.
Blender. It cost, I
Yeah.
think, $8 million. Maybe less. I don't remember. And it looks like a video game, but the story captivates the people, keeps the
Yeah.
people watching the story. I love it. I did not care that did not look like one of the mixed movies, the big movies that I'm used to do, because I care about the story. I care about being sit down and knowing, oh, what is going to happen with this character? Is he going to make it? So it shows you that
Yeah.
the industry has been changing. If this movie that
Absolutely.
is $8 million is winning over other movies, the whole thing is changing, and how people watch movies is changing. So
Absolutely.
it's it, like it or not, this is what is happening. And
It is. It is indeed.
AI
It is indeed.
AI is gonna be a big factor. In all these. It's already been a big factor.
All right. So, having been a senior VFX supervisor, what major shift have you seen in animation and VFX over the past 2 decades?
There are many. So it's gonna be, but the ones that right now, for example, I have seen right now that for me has been, it's the rendering. When I started, not even started, let's just say 20 years ago, we were using mental ray, and you had to render, and you had to have this powerful render farm and wait,
Yeah.
hours for a frame to kind of happen. And if that frame failed, you had to kind of,
You have to fix it and re-render
yeah,
it. Yeah.
re-render
It was
and
tough.
wait all this. Then,
Yeah.
now we are seeing, and of course, it's because the technology of the video cards and the render farm. But for example, I was telling you earlier, we did a movie that took the G.I. Joe movie that we did a long time ago. Right now, you can grab Unreal and do that almost in real
Yeah.
time in 3 months, 2 months.
Yeah.
When it took us, so one of the shift changes that it has been rendering, Arnold render, all these different,
Yeah.
even
Render engines.
so the
Yeah.
render
Yeah.
engines has been one of the bigger shifts that I have seen, that
Absolutely.
has allowed movies to become the quality
And
that
mo-
become.
and many of the, I would say 50-60% of the animation industry or studios, they have shift from Maya to Unreal Engine just because of the real-time render. They can see the results. They don't have to wait for the render, then see the results, then fix the problem and re-render it. So Unreal Engine is a big shift.
We use it in combination. We use it to pre-visualize, then we go, still the Arnold render gives you kind of like softness and things that sometimes Unreal will not give. But it also depends the look that you're looking for. If you're looking for some more
Yeah.
realistic look,
Yeah.
Unreal will work really well. If you look for some of the more cartoony. But I think rendering, because animation, if you think about it, I'm talking about the keyframe animation, you always have software. Yeah, it becomes a little bit faster with the technology, but rigging is always
Yeah.
rigging. Animation
Yeah.
is always animation. So it hasn't been a big
Yeah.
change to that. the shading, the shading that goes with the rendering, I think it has been also effects, meaning
Yeah.
Houdini, in grass, hair,
Yeah.
20 years ago, water. It was right now you can do the best water and hair at your house, with the click of a
Yeah.
button. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Just having a $1,500 video card. I
Uh-huh.
think that has been a huge technology of what I've been seeing,
Mm-hmm.
what these softwares can do, like vegetation,
Mm-hmm.
before you to have specific programs for
Uh-huh.
vegetation. Now, you
Uh-huh.
have the stuff moves with the wind, all by default, just move
Mm-hmm.
it, plug in. So
Mm-hmm.
what does at the end of the day, and go back to budgets and things, it allows the creatives
Uh-huh.
to be more creative. If you don't have to work,
Absolutely.
and this is something I really care a lot, if you don't have to work, so if you don't have to worry about the technology a lot, you get to worry about telling the story. So if I don't have to worry about how I'm going to do
100%.
a forest,
Mm-hmm.
then I got a beautiful forest. Now I worry about, I'm going to make the lighting looks great. So when this so you now start working on the artistic, because you are not
Mm-hmm.
backed down by the technology. And I think that's something that is going to continue getting better and better.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm excited with that part.
Great. So with Jimmy Neutron, you were working in an era where CGI for TV was still evolving. What advancement or limitations define the look and feel of the show?
With Jimmy Neutron, and of course that was a decision that the company made at that point. It was DNA Productions. They were using, and we were using Lightwave. So Jimmy Neutron
Okay.
was done in Lightwave, and they were
Okay.
using for animation. And I know the animators, had a lot of trouble for animation. They were using a plugin or a module. I don't remember the name, that to animate, it will
Mm-hmm.
export the scene, load it into this
Mm-hmm.
thing. It was painful.
Mm-hmm.
It was very painful. Then
Mm-hmm.
they managed to switch animation to Maya. And we were still
Okay.
rendering in Lightwave because we got already everything built. So they didn't want to build
Mm-hmm.
everything again.
Mm-hmm.
But that's one of the, from Maya has allowed a lot of people to kind of become more effective to the stuff. But that's kind of one of the biggest things on technology. you know
Uh-huh.
but some people may not know this, and I love
Mm-hmm.
to try different technology. But for example, Book of Life was
Uh-huh.
the back end of Book of Life. No animation was done in Maya, but Book of Life was done in
Mm-hmm.
Houdini. So the render
Oh.
of Book of Life
Mm-hmm.
is Mantra, you know
Great. Uh-huh.
and the reason why we use Houdini on Book of Life was because you got all these cemeteries with tons of candles,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
Houdini was
Mm-hmm.
still great, very great to all that stuff. So Jimmy Neutron was one of the early ones. I used 3D Studio for DOS. But Jimmy Neutron, was one of that before Maya become, the regular. By the time that they were, I think, on the full series, I think they were switching to completely to Maya. But yeah, it was done in Lightwave, and it was painful,
Uh-huh.
very painful, because the machines were very slow at that point. You had to have. Now people
Uh-huh.
is like, oh, I got this, and even myself is like, oh, why this is taking too long, and it's taking 3 more seconds than normal. Before, I come from a time where you had to hit
Mm-hmm.
render, and the
Yeah.
icon, the render
Uh-huh.
icon of the software, the 3D Studio for the US, was a cup of coffee. So telling you, as it was rendering, go get a coffee
Uh-huh.
for like 30
Uh-huh.
minutes before you get your render back. So now we want, we're used to, oh, I want more, I want more, I
Uh-huh.
want more. More you
Uh-huh.
have, more you want. No, that's kind of how it works, especially with technology. But
Uh-huh.
I got the lucky to be able to see the whole transitions of technology. I come from a time where if you had to mask it out a character in compositing, I was doing it frame by
Mm-hmm.
frame in Photoshop. It didn't.
Oh.
None of the tools existed. You had to kind of like create a mask in
Mm-hmm.
Photoshop, frame by frame, paint it.
Mm-hmm.
Now we aren't even with the new AI. You click a character and it will give you a mask, an alpha channel of that
Uh-huh.
character automatically, and it's beautiful.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So for me personally, I appreciate more of what we have, because I remember what I used to don't have. Everything was very painful. Uh,
All right.
so
Uh-huh.
I enjoy the technology advancements because I have seen them. I have seen them all.
Yeah.
I can see how you get better. You get better artistic just because you have that, and you focus less on the problems of technology, if it makes sense.
100%. It does. So, coming to my last question, what's one piece of advice you do give to up and coming animators or VFX artists trying to break into the industry?
I do that a lot, especially as we go talk to young students and young artists. It's a tough time today. If you are in animation today, we are on one of the hardest time on animation. In long time, and again, I have seen them ups and down for a long time. So right now today it could look gloomy, for
Yeah.
any new student, because the AI, the
Yeah.
stuff, even for people who is not new students.
Mm-hmm.
My advice is, if you have a passion for this, don't give up. keep keep
Yeah.
trying, keep
Mm-hmm.
studying the fundamentals. The
Yeah.
fundamentals are the most important. Sometimes I see people that they want to skip all the fundamentals and try and go in here. Then it doesn't work, you get frustrated and they abandon. An example is a modeler goes and trying to use a ZBrush right away, but they never learn the
Mm-hmm.
fundamentals of anatomy. you
Mm-hmm.
know what happened? They get very frustrated. They cannot do the work that other people they see because they didn't learn the fundamentals. So sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
learning the fundamentals, being known how to draw, know how to,
Mm-hmm.
what is lighting. If you like lighting, learn about photography, learn about how the masters painted. All the stuff, believe it or not, applies in the end, and really applies. And as a matter of fact, is what maybe makes you different from other people. But I always say, learn the fundamentals first, and then get the stuff. Learn from the old masters. Watch everything. I love animation, but I love everything. I can watch. I love anime. I love every obscure Korean movie, because it's always something to learn from everywhere. If you are passionate, don't give up. I know artificial intelligence. I hate call it artificial intelligence because it's kind of like deeper learning for me, but it's artificial AI.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
discouraging a lot of people. I hate what AI is doing, especially on learning
Mm-hmm.
from work from other people. That's
Yeah.
that's not right, and that's a whole hour conversation on its own.
Yeah.
But AI is not going anywhere. So
Mm-hmm.
learn to adapt around the stuff. I do believe that right now,
Mm-hmm.
we are in times where um, things are really changing, but then they're gonna
Settle
become
down.
settled. And I think it happens in photography. I love film photography. When digital
Okay.
photography came in, people completely trash film photography,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
but then it slowly came back. People
Yeah.
appreciated the handcrafting of film photography, and now they're both combined together. They're both living in
Absolutely.
harmony. I think that's what's going to happen with AI and animation. you know
And I think you're right. If you are passionate about the work and if you're ready to learn and if you're ready to take the challenges, then AI or any other technology will not impact or will not affect anything. So if you have the passion, if anyone have a passion, they can do whatever it takes to become who they want to
Yeah,
be.
exactly. I mean, look
So,
at look at the stop motion. People
yeah.
people forgot stop motion. Leica,
Hmm.
very few continue doing stop motion, and people are
Yeah.
now appreciate it as something very important. So because they didn't give
Yeah.
up, they didn't care to change with the trends. They love
Hmm.
what they do. They love whoever loves stop motion. They don't stop doing stop motion because animation in computers came in. They love it, and now they have their own space, their own place
Yeah.
in the history of animation, or on the place of
Hmm.
animation. I think if you love this, if you really love, don't
Hmm.
give up. Just keep trying. Don't
100%.
get demoralized with the stuff that is happening.
Yeah.
Like I say, through many years, the industry have gone ups and downs, ups and downs.
Yeah.
This is one more.
And I think Augusto, it's with every industry. You have spikes, right? Not the graph is never straight going up. So challenges, problems will come in any other industry. Like we have faced a lot of changes and challenges. So
I think something that has changed it, and I say this to students a lot too, is trying to be more nimble, trying to be that generalist again. I think with
yeah.
all the new tools, a generalist is more important now. If you only, I see it like right now, if people only knows how to do modeling or only knows how to do texturing, but they don't know anything else, they're going to have a harder time finding work.
Absolutely. You have to be versatile if you want to survive into the
Exactly.
industry
And I think
or
with the
grow in the
new,
industry.
exactly, I think with the new tools,
Yeah.
AI or no AI, doesn't matter. You have to be more versatile, and I think that's
And I think and I think the biggest problem, that I see with the youngsters and young youth who are coming into the animation industry just want to stick to one part of the entire pipeline, and they just keep working. Let's say if I talk about the modeler, they don't want to evolve. They don't want to be a rigger, or they don't want to they want to be a CGI. So you are right. If you are going to be versatile, then yes, there are many opportunities in the next 50 years, 5, 10 decades for you.
exactly. And the problem is that what you just say, that used to work 10, 5, 10 years ago, where if you were just only a modeler, a lot of companies. Now, not so much. Even when Real Effects hires, we love to have people who is versatile. Again, that goes to that budget movies. Like if we don't have work for a modeler, but you know how to do lighting, you're more important because you can just move from modeling to lighting when it's nothing working. So the industry has changed about that very specific. Now, there are bigger places that still have the very specifics and they're very important. But
Mm-hmm.
there are also new small places. Like, for example, if we go back to Flow, that was done by a
Mm-hmm.
lot of generalists. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
some keyframe animations, they will do animation, and
Mm-hmm.
that's a very specific thing too. But uh, you know, because now
Mm-hmm.
what we are seeing is the rise of the smaller companies, the companies that are only 30 people, and they're
Yeah.
doing great jobs with 30 or 40 people in a company, but they
Mm-hmm.
are all versatile. You cannot have a
Yeah.
company of
Yeah.
30 or 40 people if you are just
Uh-huh.
a specialist on the stuff. So that
100%,
you know
100%, 100%.
so
So I really enjoyed this conversation with you, right? So thank you for tuning into another episode of Prolific Perspectives. We hope you enjoyed this insightful conversation with Augusto Schillaci. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Until next time.